All right, shalom, 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 and welcome to another new moon video review with your Akazaki Yahoo. And I'm joined as always by my uh, very best Akinanaya. Shalom, my king.
Hey, Shalom Aki, Shalom Yasharal, Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shabarakatah.
Yahweh Bashir Yahweh praises to the Most High Yahweh. In the name of His beloved Son Yahweh Shah, I bless you. So we're back with another video review, and Slaki, I would be remiss if I didn't say all praises to the Most High, Yahweh Bashem Hamashiach, Yahweh Shai, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. Shalom, Wa, Baruchi, peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the Most High brings us back together, and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh, and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. All praises to the Almighty Yah. Hallelujah.
So be it. Hallelujah.
Yes, indeed. All right, so we're going to jump to the video review here. It is first moon, 12th month, Israel.
God.
Uh, I'll be honest, as you got to look at this for what it is. None of us are here by our own capabilities or powers or understanding. It is our most high power who keeps us breathing and functioning and awaiting the return of Hamashiach. So uh, always give thanks, be thankful, so very thankful for the grace and the mercy of the Most High, and for including us in His right now plan, because that's why we're here to do His will. So let's go ahead and get to the video review. This particular video comes to us by Black Journals. Shout out to Black Journals as always. Magnificent work they do. And this is called Alexandre Dumas, the Black author of the Three Musketeers they tried to erase. So they tried to take away his stuff, according to Black Journals here. Let's get to it and get through it. Enjoy.
Paris, July 1830. Smoke from barricades still drifts along the city streets. In a dimly lit armory near the Rue de l'Arbre Sec, a tall figure stands out among soldiers. His name is Alexandre Dumas, not only the son of a celebrated general, but already a rising playwright and soon to be one of the most famous authors in the world. His brown skin is sun-kissed after days of fighting. He holds a heavy ledger of inventory, but his gaze is firm. Across from him stands a fearful Neapolitan officer and his wife, who had taken shelter there during the uprising assigned to guard the royal gunpowder. "Surrender!" the officer orders. Suddenly, the wife screams and clutches her husband's arm. "It is the second revolt of the Negroes," she cries, pointing at Dumas' curly hair and dark skin. She remembers the brutal slave revolts in Saint-Domingue, her parents killed before her eyes. For a moment, Dumas, already dusted with powder from collecting munitions, hears her mistake him for a rebel of African heritage. It was a bitter irony. There he was, fighting for a new front, only to be seen as a specter of colonial fear. He smiles wryly, fighting anger and pity. The woman has no idea that the man before her is the very proof of France's ideals. A man born of a slave woman and a French aristocrat, raised in France as a citizen, now serving its cause with honor. A man who would go on to change the world with nothing but his pen. This is the story of Alexandre Dumas, the legendary Black author history tried to erase. Most people know his stories: the Three Musketeers, the Count of Monte Cristo, but very few people actually know the story behind the name on the cover. The story about how one man used the power of storytelling to defy an entire empire and leave a legacy too bold to bury against all odds. Before we get into this epic adventure, take a second to subscribe if you haven't already. Here at Black Journals, we uncover the forgotten, the erased, and the legends you were never taught in school. Now let's begin this powerful tale of ink, identity, and legacy. As a little boy, Alexandre Dumas had seemed white, with fairer skin. Passers-by might have mistaken him for the child of any modest French family in Villers-Cotterêts. But with adolescence came change. His hair curled tightly, his skin took on the deeper hue of his paternal lineage, and whispers began to follow him. Children who once played beside him started calling him names he didn't yet understand. It was then, sensing his confusion and sorrow, that his mother sat him down and whispered the truth of his bloodline, a truth both heroic and burdened. His father, General Thomas Alexandre Dumas, had been born in Saint-Domingue, the brutal French colony that would become Haiti. He was the mixed-race son of a white French aristocrat, the Marquis de la Pailleterie, and an enslaved African woman, Marie-Cécette Dumas. After being sold by his own father to finance, the Marquis returned to France. General Thomas Alexandre was later freed and took his mother's surname in solidarity with her bondage. He joined the French army at a time of revolution, and his rise was meteoric. A man of unmatched height, strength, and discipline, he became a general in his early 30s, commanding tens of thousands of soldiers. Among them, he earned the nickname the Black Hercules, not just for his battlefield prowess, but for his principled refusal to participate in the pillaging and executions that stained many campaigns. He was perhaps the highest-ranking black military officer in Western history at the time, and a living symbol of revolutionary ideals. But those ideals had their limits. When Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power, General Dumas became a threat, not just as a man of color with real influence, but as one who openly criticized Bonaparte's authoritarian turn. After a campaign in Egypt, he was captured and imprisoned in a dungeon in Naples for nearly 2 years. He suffered starvation, poisoning, and chronic illness. And when finally released, he returned to France a broken man. Despite his loyal service, he received no pension. Napoleon had banned officers of African descent from serving again. In 1806, when Alexandre was not yet 4 years old, General Dumas, his father, died in obscurity and debt, unable even to afford medicine. The general's funeral passed without honor or military salute. And so, young Alexandre grew up under the shadow of that loss. His mother, Marie-Louise Elisabeth Labouret, descended from innkeepers and far removed from aristocracy, was left with nothing but her pride and a single-room apartment. Yet she clung fiercely to the dignity her husband had earned and passed that pride to her son. She scraped together what she could from sewing and the charity of neighbors to ensure that Alexandre had a proper education. At the local school, he caught the attention of a compassionate teacher, a young abbot named Henri Grégoire, who in his youth had been a prominent abolitionist. Under Grégoire's tutelage, Alexandre developed a love for history and language and learned the weight of legacy. Despite their poverty, the boy inherited a certain charm and magnetism that opened doors. He was tall, energetic, and quick-witted, traits that would serve him later in Parisian salons. He ran errands for loges, copied documents for clerks, and found scraps of time between tasks to read voraciously. He immersed himself in tales of chivalry and daring, not just to entertain himself, but to dream of becoming someone who could shape the world with words. Dumas began writing poetry in the margins of ledger books, retelling Homer's epics with his own twists. His imagination wandered far beyond the narrow town streets. By 14, he had taught himself Spanish just to read Cervantes in the original. He studied fencing obsessively, as though preparing to leap from the page into the role of one of his own future characters. He understood early that knowledge was not just power, it was armor. In his small attic room, filled with borrowed books and candle smoke, he vowed to take back the dignity that had been denied to his father, not with a sword, but with a pen. And yet, even in his earliest moments of triumph, he knew the world would not see him the way he saw himself. His frizzy hair, his ambiguous features, the stories whispered about his father's African blood. These marked him as different, as foreign, as a curiosity in the eyes of a society still tethered to racial hierarchies. But rather than run from that truth, Dumas began to forge it into a narrative of defiance. He did not inherit a title or a fortune, but he inherited something more powerful, a sense of justice, a love for drama, and a fire to prove that greatness had no color. In every lesson, in every hardship, the boy was quietly molding himself into the kind of man who would later write heroes too, large for the age that tried to box him in. In 1822, at just 20 years old, Alexandre Dumas made a choice that would alter the course of literary history. He left behind the narrow streets of Villers-Cotterêts, the provincial town where he had grown up surrounded by reminders of both greatness and poverty, and set off for Paris. This decision was not an impulsive one. Life in the village had become a cage, though he had earned the respect of neighbors for his intelligence and charm. There were few paths forward for a young man of mixed race and limited means. He had seen his mother grow old beneath the weight of financial struggle. He had tasted the condescension of white employers who called him clever, but never offered real advancement. His father's name opened no doors. Dumas needed more than survival, needed possibility. And Paris, to him, meant everything. Theater, revolution, press, prestige, and most of all, escape. Dumas had little more than a few coins and a head full of stories. But fortune, or perhaps fate, was with him. A recommendation letter based on his calligraphy skills landed him a job as a clerk in the household of Louis Philippe, Duke of Orléans. It was an unexpected stroke of luck. The job came with modest pay, but more importantly, access to books, libraries, salons, and the kind of intellectual company he had only dreamed of. The Duke's household was a crossroads of politics, arts, and gossip. And Alexandre, ever observant, soaked it all in. Paris in the 1820s was alive with post-revolutionary energy. The Bourbon monarchy had been restored, but dissent simmered beneath the surface. Newspapers blossomed, pamphlets floated through the streets, and cafes buzzed with political argument. It was in these circles that Dumas began to discover his place as a writer. He joined literary groups and befriended journalists, poets, and dramatists. Though he was still viewed as an outsider by some, his wit, confidence, and sheer storytelling talent allowed him to hold his own. He listened, he learned, and then he began to write. Theater was his first love. He found in the stage a canvas large enough for his imagination and drama, grand enough to match the stories that had lived inside him since childhood. At night, after finishing his duties in the Duke's household, Dumas would scribble dialogue and plot lines by candlelight. His days were spent transcribing royal correspondence. His nights were devoted to characters who dueled, betrayed, and loved with reckless intensity. The political unrest of the times, the memory of revolution, the stirrings of rebellion, all seeped into his work. In 1829, after years of quiet struggle, his first major play, Henry III and His Court, debuted at the prestigious Comédie Française. It was a triumph. The public embraced its sharp political commentary, romantic flair, and bold characters. Overnight, Alexandre Dumas went from an anonymous clerk to a celebrated playwright. The success of that single production brought not just fame, but the precious time and money needed to write full time. No longer trapped behind a desk, Dumas poured himself into the craft. A year later, his follow-up play, Christine, confirmed his rising star. But in 1830, during the July Revolution, Dumas also briefly stepped beyond the world of ink and theater into the streets of armed rebellion. In one episode that would stay with him for life, he entered the Paris armory to help secure powder and arms for the revolutionary cause. There, he was mistaken by a Neapolitan officer's wife for something far more dangerous than a rebel. Her voice trembled as she cried out, "It is the second revolt of the Negroes!" Terrified by the sight of Dumas's dark complexion and curled hair. In that moment, she was not seeing a Frenchman defending Republican ideals. She was seeing a shadow from the colonies, a fear born of the Haitian Revolution, a specter of black uprising. Dumas, covered in powder and grit, stood stunned by the woman's panic. He said nothing, letting her fear echo. That moment, so absurd and yet so telling, reminded him that no matter how French his blood or patriotic his actions, he would still be marked first by his color. The experience planted itself deep inside him. It did not break him, but it carved out a space in his memory that he would never forget. The revolution passed. The monarchy fell again. And Dumas, already a man committed to change, returned to his writing desk with his eyes newly sharpened. With his foot firmly in the door of Parisian theater, Dumas began to explore fiction. The emergence of serialized literature, novels published in weekly or monthly installments in newspapers, offered a new opportunity. The format suited him perfectly. His talent for cliffhangers, action, and intricate plots made his stories irresistible to readers who eagerly awaited each new chapter. By the 1840s, Alexandre Dumas was France's most popular author. His pen produced page after page of best-selling novels. The Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo, and their sequels, along with plays, travel memoirs, and essays on celebrated crimes. His books turned into spectacles for the theater and eventually films. Over 100 languages translated his work, and perhaps 200 movies were later made from his tales. Dumas built a grand chateau outside Paris, naming it Monte Cristo after his masterpiece, and furnished it with paintings of musketeers on bold steeds. He threw lavish parties and welcomed foreign dignitaries under his roof. For a time, it seemed nothing could diminish the triumphant author. Yet, behind his booming success, clouds gathered. Rivals in the literary world began to whisper that Dumas' talent must be borrowed. He collaborated openly, for example, with Augustin Grissier and Auguste Maquet on many novels. But in Parisian salons, fingers pointed at him. Some critics muttered that only a white man could achieve real genius, insinuating that Dumas's collaborations were a way to conceal his deficiencies. The word mulatto was not spoken aloud, but it echoed beneath polite conversation. One actress's lover, the poet Alfred de Vigny, even sneered that Dumas was charming, but a true nobleman, worth more than a mulatto like myself. Humiliated, Dumas wrote back that day to Marie Doval, "Monsieur de Vigny is a great poet and a real nobleman. Both are worth far more than a mulatto like myself." His pride stung, but he signed off with wry dignity. In the drawing rooms of 19th century Paris, being of mixed race was noted in smirks and double meanings. Dumas saw beauty in the poet's praise, but felt the taint of that petty jibe. Still, the public adored the stories, not paying much attention to the author's skin. For a while, it seemed Dumas' race did not buy him from royal favor or society's embrace. Indeed, when people of color were widely disregarded, in the upper classes, Dumas' mixed racial heritage still did not seem to have an adverse effect on his literary, social, or financial standing. France's revolutionary ideals had briefly modeled the old racial castes. He could claim the identity of a Creole noble with little interference. Dumas himself often downplayed his heritage in public. He never concealed it, but neither made it his banner. Perhaps that shrewd choice, living simply as a gifted writer, protected him in those years from outright exclusion. One evening in 1832, Dumas stood in a packed opera house, imagining himself on a stage in Africa, where he might one day tell a new legend of heroism. But for the moment, he was a Parisian celebrity, revered by French aristocrats and commoners alike. He was courted by salons, praised by Pope Gregory XVI as the French Cicero, and even championed a National Language Academy for his epigrams. This year, he was anointed the People's Laureate of France, a herald of unity beyond birthplace or blood. Yet he never forgot what had happened in that Paris armory 8 years ago, when old fears surfaced at the sight of his dark face. It drove home that even at glory, he was still seen first as a black man. By the mid-1840s, Alexandre Dumas stood atop a mountain of literary triumphs. His novels were serialized across Europe. His name alone could sell out newspapers. The Three Musketeers and the Count of Monte Cristo had secured him immortality. No French writer was more beloved by the general public. But beneath the applause, deeper ambitions stirred in him, and darker tensions brewed behind the scenes. Dumas had always believed literature could do more than entertain. Even in his most flamboyant adventures, he wove in themes of justice, betrayal, and power. In 1839, he published Captain Pamphile, a children's story laced with a sharp condemnation of slavery. Then, in 1843, he released Georges, a novel set on the island of Mauritius. Its protagonist, like Dumas himself, was of mixed race, a man who lived between two worlds. In the story, Georges rises from invisibility to leadership, challenging the colonial forces that had tried to erase him. The novel was bold, personal, and unmistakably political. But critics did not take it seriously. French reviewers focused on plot rather than message. They labeled Georges an exotic romance, ignoring its direct engagement with race, identity, and revolution. Even at the height of his success, Dumas's more radical work was dismissed as background noise. To many in the French literary establishment, he was a storyteller, not a thinker. They had already decided his role. He could entertain, but he would not be allowed to challenge. Around this time, problems began to surface behind the scenes. One of his closest collaborators, Auguste Maquet, grew increasingly resentful. For years, Maquet had helped Dumas by drafting historical outlines and plotting story arcs. Dumas would then transform those notes into full-bodied novels, injecting the characters with personality and voice. Their teamwork produced some of the most famous books, Alarm, in French literature. But Maquet wanted more than payment, he wanted credit. Though Dumas had always acknowledged Maquet's assistance, he refused to share authorship. In his mind, Maquet offered the framework, but the soul of the work, the dialogue, the rhythm, the drama, was his alone. In 1858, Maquet took him to court, seeking to be named as co-author and demanding a share of the profits. The lawsuit was messy and highly public. Maquet presented drafts and letters as evidence of his foundational role. Dumas defended himself fiercely, pointing out that Maquet had never written a successful book on his own. The court reached a compromise. Maquet was granted compensation, but not authorship. The works remained under Dumas's name. Still, the damage had already been done. Critics who had long doubted Dumas's genius seized the moment. Was he truly the mind behind his masterpieces? or simply the overseer of a literary workshop. These suspicions were not only about authorship, they were also about race. The idea that a man of African descent could create such brilliance had always been uncomfortable for some. Now, with lawsuits and rumors, they had an excuse to believe otherwise. A second lawsuit followed. Augustin Grisier, Dumas's former fencing instructor, claimed that his life had been used without adequate credit. Though the case was smaller, it added to a growing sense that Dumas's empire was cracking. Friends became accusers. Admirers turned distant. The literary elite, already skeptical of his flamboyance, began to mock rather than admire. Then came 1851. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in a coup, dissolving the National Assembly and declaring himself Emperor Napoleon III. The liberal hopes of the Second Republic collapsed overnight. Dumas, a proud supporter of Republican ideals, found himself out of favor. His political alignment was no longer fashionable. His enemies gained ground. His flamboyant lifestyle, once tolerated, was now scorned. Creditors grew louder. His fortune, once vast, had been drained by generosity, lawsuits, and mismanagement. The Chateau de Monte Cristo, his grand estate, stood as a monument to a life he could no longer afford. Scandal followed him through the press. Banks demanded payment. The literary world moved on to colder voices and stricter forms. Realism replaced romance. Dumas became a man out of time. Faced with public scorn and private collapse, he fled. First to Brussels, hoping to escape debt collectors and the headlines. There, he started a newspaper, Le Musketeers, where he published fiction, essays, and commentary. He adapted the Corsican Brothers into a stage play and tried to reclaim the success of his earlier years. But unfortunately, the world had changed. Even in Brussels, prejudice followed him. When the mail arrived, addressed to Monsieur Dumas, l'étranger, the street boys laughed. Some called him Le Nègre Dumas with sneering contempt. At a diplomatic reception, a Belgian politician praised his talent, then said bluntly, "Your blood is not ours." Dumas smiled, raised his glass, and gave no sign of offense. But the truth was clear. No matter how far he traveled, no matter how many books he published, no matter how many readers he inspired, he would never fully belong. Then, in 1858, another door opened. Russian officials, eager to align their empire with the great cultural capitals of Europe, extended an invitation to the legendary yet exiled French author. For Alexandre Dumas, worn down by lawsuits, political betrayal, and racial ridicule in his own country, the offer came as a breath of possibility. France had grown cold, indifferent to the very man whose words had once ignited its imagination. But in Russia, the name Dumas still rang out with reverence. He accepted without hesitation. When he arrived in St. Petersburg, the reception stunned even him. Word of his arrival had spread fast, and the Russian literary elite turned out in force. Nobles bowed, writers stood, and students recited his lines from memory. Theaters sold out at the mere mention of his presence. Bookshops placed his translated novels in their windows, stacked in careful displays like sacred texts. His stories of musketeers, vengeance, loyalty, and love had already taken root in the Russian imagination, and now the creator himself had arrived, flesh and blood. It was the kind of hero's welcome Dumas had not felt in France for years. In Moscow, he was introduced to members of the Tsar's court and was invited to salons where aristocrats debated his characters as if they were real political figures. Intellectuals treated him as a philosopher, not just a storyteller. Even Fyodor Dostoevsky, though ideologically at odds with Dumas's style, admitted the Frenchman's unparalleled grip on popular consciousness. For a man whose legacy had been blurred by race and rivalry at home, This recognition felt almost surreal. But Dumas was not fooled by applause. He noticed the surprise in some faces, the pause before a compliment, the double take at his complexion. Behind the flattery, he could still hear the old question forming in their minds. How could the son of a slave, a man of African descent, possess such clarity of speech, such command of language, such mastery of form? Some guests voiced their admiration as if they were marveling at a trick of nature. The compliments stung because they arrived wrapped in disbelief. He had learned by now to carry himself with grace and humor. In crowded drawing rooms, he told stories with charm and mischief. He quoted Latin and scripture. He recited lines from his plays and corrected those who mispronounced his titles. If they expected a literary savage, he gave them a gentleman. If they doubted his genius, he overwhelmed them. With wit, he never raised his voice, but his presence silenced rooms. Still, inside the ache remained. Even when celebrated, he was always proving something. Not just his worth, but his right to exist without question. Dumas did not come to Russia to rest. He came to work. And work he did. He penned travel articles, completed chapters of ongoing novels, and corresponded regularly with French publishers. He studied Russian society closely, even as he charmed it, and began crafting new stories set in this strange land of wealth and winter. His curiosity was boundless. He visited libraries, museums, prisons, and churches. He interviewed soldiers and clergy. His mind moved at the same restless pace as ever. Though exiled in body, he refused to be exiled in spirit. He sent manuscripts back to France with the same determination he had shown in his youth. No longer the darling of Paris, he still wrote for its people, for the readers who had once devoured his every word. He believed that someday, somehow, they would remember him not just for his characters, but for his voice. A voice that refused to go silent. For Dumas, writing had never been just a profession. It was the weapon he used to cut through a world that denied him ownership of his genius. It was the light he carried into rooms that closed doors at the sight of his skin. It was how he told the truth when the truth was not wanted. To keep writing was to keep breathing. It was defiance, yes, but it was also survival. The page was the only place no one could interrupt him. It was the one kingdom where he ruled absolutely. As snow fell on the rooftops of St. Petersburg and the Russian press continued to sing his praises, Dumas stood alone in the borrowed warmth of another empire. He knew that applause could be fleeting, but legacy, that was something he could shape with every sentence. He was no longer chasing approval. He was reclaiming permanence. Meanwhile, back in France, a strange counter-narrative took hold. By portraying Dumas as just a wealthy adventurer who looted Paris' coffers, some critics could dismiss his achievements. He became a caricature of death and celebrity. Shadowy rumors insinuated he had let subordinates do the real writing, feeding the idea that his biracial blood somehow needed to be improved by ghostwriters. This posthumous narrative conveniently downplayed his authorship and innovation. For decades, school curricula at best mentioned Dumas only as the creator of entertaining hero stories, without noting the bravery he showed just to exist as the man he was. In French literary history classes, it was often lumped with popular novelists, while the so-called serious authors such as Hugo, Balzac, Flaubert were lauded as the true voices of 19th century genius. When Dumas finally returned to France in 1864, he was a tired old man, the student of Victor Hugo and fellow romantic giants. Once the darling of Paris, could hardly secure a publisher for his later books. He wrote memoirs, chronicling his father's saga and his own, partly to reclaim his story from myth. But he did not live to see them fully published. on December 5th, 1870, as the siege of Paris raged. Alexandre Dumas quietly died at his son's home in Puys, Normandy. Word of his death trickled out as one more casualty of that terrible Franco-Prussian War. France celebrated no triumphant farewell for its great writer. He was laid to rest not in the national pantheon alongside Voltaire and Rousseau, but simply in the cemetery of his birth village. For many years, it was as if Alexandre Dumas' epitaph read, "Of many tongues, but none among the chosen few." The big literary history that framed school children's view of France rarely gave him more than a chapter heading. In the annals of great writers, his name often appeared as a footnote or in passing, a swashbuckler's name, exotic but not essential. And because he himself had loved life so exuberantly, enjoying all its colors, the subtle injustices he endured were often passed over as mere historical trivia. It took another century for France and the world to begin to set the record straight. In 1902, for his centennial, people in Villers-Cotterêts finally recognized their native son's genius. A modest memorial was placed there. But the true turning point came in 2002, when President Jacques Chirac, half jokingly baring his chest, presided over the reinterment of Dumas' ashes in the Pantheon of Paris. Framed by marble sculptures of Hugo and Zola, his coffin drew national media attention. In his speech, Chirac explicitly acknowledged the racism that had existed in the treatment of the remaining legacy of Alexandre Dumas, calling the Pantheon ceremony a way of correcting that wrong. Chirac declared that at last, this man born of slaves would stand among France's intellectual heroes, as it truly always was. Those words struck deep for many who had forgotten Dumas' full story. Since then, Dumas' reputation has experienced a renaissance. In Villers-Cotterêts, a bronze statue was unveiled in 2005, where children now play at his feet, and tourists flock for selfies in front of the author who long prowled those streets unseen. Festivals of swashbuckling films and historical novel readings celebrate his books every summer. Museums and scholars have finally begun untangling the layers of his identity. In 2023, the Berkeley Art Museum mounted an exhibition, Alexandre Dumas' Afro, Blackness, Caricatured, Erased, and Back Again, highlighting how his image was alternately mocked, whitewashed, and reclaimed over the centuries. They revealed 19th century satirical prints that once exaggerated Dumas' big lips and wild curls to portray him as a monster. Racist caricatures that he could only answer with his wit, famously quipping that he could trace his ancestry back to the gods of storytelling long before the snobs' family lines. In literature classrooms and African diaspora circles, Dumas is now often cited as an early voice against slavery. His novels Georges and Captain Pamphile are studied for their explicit condemnations of colonial injustice. Biographers no longer omit the fact that the hero of Monte Cristo is modeled on a man whose father was betrayed by an empire, a real story of a father and son seeking justice. Even the film industry has had to reckon. When a French movie company cast Gérard Depardieu as Dumas in 2005, quoting him in brown makeup, public outcry reminded the nation that Dumas' African roots matter. Critics said plainly, you cannot erase him from history. Today, as literature lovers revisit Dumas' swashbuckling pages, they find not only dazzling escapades, but a man of layered sorrow and dignity. He wrote of honor and freedom as if he owed it to every oppressed father, like his. Modern readers often reflect how the author, by living boldly, challenged the prejudice of his age. Academics have catalogued the subtle hints of Creole speech in his dialogues. Haitian scholars celebrate him as part of their literary heritage. Museums and the media finally label him as of African descent and explore what that meant in the France of kings and republics. This reclamation matters. It tells us that Alexandre Dumas was not a footnote in European letters. He was one of its grand architects, a man who blended his family's African legacy into tales of universal romance and rebellion. The injustice he faced, the whisper campaigns, the attempted erasures, is now remembered as part of his story, not its end. In the pantheon and in people's hearts, Dumas stands tall, an image of the black Hercules who embraced his mixed blood and yet forged a life larger than the narrow definitions of race. His swords still flash off these pages, but more importantly, his indomitable spirit shines through history. If the story of Alexandre Dumas moved you, then help us keep his legacy alive. Like this video to signal that histories like his matter. Share it with some.
All right. Alexander Dumas. Uh, Initially, I thought I had made a mistake here because I thought that the narrator said that his father was Caucasian, and I began Googling, and I think I misheard it or something because it's what I'm finding is that his father was a Haitian and part of the Haitian Revolution. Uh, did I hear that right, or am I?
So, I did some digging around while we were listening, and his father appears to be a Frenchman, and his mother appears to be the one with African roots.
Oh snap! Oh, see, I thought that's what the guy said, what the narrator said, and when I went looking, it brought this up. Uh, like, well, he died in 1806. Isn't that what it said? 1806. I believe so. So I may have gotten double sidetracked because this may be actually him as opposed to his father. Yeah, I thought it said that his father was a wow, was a French person, and his mother was a she worked as a uh, you know, yeah. So well, that's ironic because we don't normally cover things like that, or people like that. I should say. I shouldn't say things, but people like that with those situations. But I did find it highly ironic that though if his father if his father was a white man, uh, they didn't care. They treated him like trash anyway, and I thought that was ironic because he seemed to be, uh, what they were talking about with him seemed to tie directly to the curses. And I know the curses would, in this society, or in really in this society, in any society, um, it's going to deal with our people in that manner, and that's how the curses fall on you. So, regardless of who your father is, um, if you look like a so-called Negro, or if you look what's called black, then the people who've been in power for since the time of the Greeks, they're going to oppress you, and that's exactly what he suffered. And surprisingly, he went to Russia, and they gave him kind of a different. So Russia's been different for a while. Uh, we're going to have to do some. I have to do some more research on Russia because that's ironic for them to in the 1800s for them to reverence from what he said. how they behaved when he showed up. People bowed, and some people and writers stood, and they was quoting his works like almost like scripture. Like that's phew, that's something else.
Yeah,
But
con.
yeah, but anyhow, I did see that. I saw a direct correlation, and if he wasn't for certain that his father was a Caucasian man, then I would think he was certainly of had a Negro father of a Negro descent, but he's Caucasian man's father. But that's one of those kind of murky areas because he was treated like garbage pretty much most all of his life, and even when he found success, the people who he found success from, and they still treated him like lower class and talked to him like he was a well trained animal of some sort. Like, oh, you can do that. Oh, that's good for you. That's good. Like, what? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's crazy. That's like
God.
I'll never forget the time I was told, "You're one of the good ones. You're not like those other guys." I was like, "What?" I was young then. I didn't know exactly what they were talking about, but yeah, that's the reality. So I'm gonna go ahead and yield there. Go ahead, Akeem.
Con, this story sounds familiar of what the experience that we know a lot of people with African ancestry, so-called African ancestry of faced,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be here in America or parts of Western Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the descendants of our people have had a difficult time. Um, this brother lived uh, an interesting life. A very interesting life. I was thinking that he was someone else. That we, yeah, I was thinking he was the famous fencer.
Oh,
Uh, that had a movie come out about him maybe a few years back, but he was different. But it's you've got a lot of talented people, with African ancestry blood, man. I'll yield there.
interesting, interesting. Well, yeah, I didn't know very much about him, and I was very interested to find out about him. Uh, I first heard it, not heard of him. I'd heard of him, I think, in school, but um, it was in Django when the movie Django when they put in there Alexandre Dumas. You must be a fan. Name your captive after his lead character, and so yeah, that's when I first heard it. First heard of it that I can think of. So interesting information. We'll go ahead and close this on out. I hope you have enjoyed the new moon celebration. And as we enter into the 12th month, praises to the Abba for a opportunity to continue and operating in the way that He sees fit for us. But we do this for a specific purpose. Why do we do it? Romans chapter 10 and verse 1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Ha'abba for Israel is that they might be saved. We want to see our people saved. We want to see our people set free. And we want to see our people return to the prominence that the Most High have instituted for us. How are we going to do it? First of all, keeping the faith and the belief in the return of Hamashiach and his restoration of the nation of Israel. Also, Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13. Let us hit a conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is so very important to understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. At the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled, and all the smoke is cleared, we will be judged. Or rather, we have feared the Most High and kept His commandments. Why? Because this is the whole duty of man. I am Yaakazaki Yahu, as always, joined by my most esteemed Akenaniah, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem always unto the Most High Power, Yahweh Bashem HaMashiach wa Malak, Yahweh Shai, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, wa baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day when the Most High brings us back together and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Until that day come, shalom, family.
Shalom, shalom, Mr. Bakar.
All praises to the Most High. Praise you, Abba Yah, Kwam Yasha'Allah,
Kwam Yashala.
and Barak Hashem Yahweh.